Hello everyone, Dr. Mark DiPasquale, Dr. Sean Campbell. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having this chat. We're at One Health and Wellness, and this is the Health and Wellness channel. Hello everyone, and today we're actually talking about neurology. We're talking about the brain because we've had a few questions through the week around the work that we do around brain function and all the testing that we do. And I just want to give a bit of a background of why we do those tests and what we actually are looking for in those tests and what can be done. So in brain function, we're obviously understanding that the brain controls our body, and we want our brain to be functioning really well, and we also want our body to be functioning really well. I think one of the most exciting things that we've got going at the moment is joining the team at One Health and Fitness, creating a wellness centre is a perfect opportunity for us to bring in the brain activity part of wellness, and they also are looking after health and fitness with regards to programs, etc. It's a great partnership. So let's talk about some of the tests that we do. What about the functional neurology tests? What are we looking for with those tests when we actually do them for our patients?
All right, well, at the moment we're doing something called functional neurology. So rather than looking for sort of hard neurological signs associated with some sort of pathology, something
like a
physically wrong,
like a stroke
brain,
or
like a
brain
stroke.
damage or something like that.
Yeah, like if you were to take a nerve and cut it, you're no longer getting signals from the brain along that nerve to a muscle, to an organ, to the body. We're not looking for that sort of sign.
Yep.
We're looking for signs that indicate that the brain is not controlling that area to an optimal potential.
Perfect.
So we're looking for basically a lag in how well the brain is communicating with different areas of the body.
Wow. So I understand that, let's say for example, and unfortunate to say, but if I'm in a car accident or something like that, I might get brain damage or something which will then affect the way my brain functions and how it can control my body. But what would create lag just from day to day? What would create a brain not functioning correctly? What would create that lag?
Well, usually this is, for me, the biggest thing I see is it's a lack of activity in that pathway. So the way the body works is we do something, the brain creates a pathway where it goes, this is how I do that activity, this is how I think that way, this is how I move that way.
Yep.
And then the more we use that pathway, the more we stimulate it, the more we strengthen it. So the better we actually, the more easier we can do that activity, we can think that way. And so basically it's areas of the body that are not getting used properly, creates these poor pathways where you get better at actually not moving properly.
So amazing, absolutely amazing. So I'm thinking of a lot of people working in offices. This day and age we work on computers a lot more. We're definitely not moving around as much as we did. Our travel is...
I mean, it's interesting. I saw someone yesterday who he originally was a painter.
Yes.
And so all day up and down ladders, a lot of physical movement, a lot of overhead shoulder type movement.
Yes.
Had a few issues to do with shoulder movements and some back pain and things like that. And recently had a complete overhaul of his career and moved to a job where he was sitting all day. And he's had far more problems since moving to a seated position for 8, 9, 10 hours of the day than what he had when he was doing something physical all day with a lot of variety in his movement.
Wow, that's amazing. So what it's basically saying is that it comes down to the old saying, doesn't it? Move it or lose it.
Absolutely.
If we're not moving, we're not feeding the brain with information. If we're not feeding the brain with information, whether it doesn't become as strong or as active.
And that's an interesting point. He's talking about feeding the brain with movement and with information. And that's really the way all the fitness industry and everything is going now. All the therapists in all different industries, chiropractic's sort of leading the way with that. But what we're looking at is how the brain thrives on movement, and it's movement that actually drives the activity in the brain, and then it's that increase in activity that improves things like posture and healthy thoughts and all that sort of thing.
So if we're talking to people now who have office jobs, perhaps are sitting for 7, 8 hours a day at computers, what we can see is that the brain can be very active, can't it? Because we're on computers, we're actually thinking a lot. We're thinking a lot. And there's possibly a lot of stress associated with that.
And people know that by the end of the day, if they've been sitting in front of a computer all day, they literally feel fatigued and drained from sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So some of the tests actually do show us that there are parts of the brain which, how would you say, they're not as active as other parts of the brain?
Yeah,
Would we
absolutely.
say they go to sleep, or they just don't become as efficient?
Yeah, it's more the balance. So we're looking at the balance between you've got two sides of the brain, each side controlling movement on. Typically, we see movement is controlled by the opposite, but a lot of movement that we don't know about is controlled by the same side. So it's a bit more complex than just right controls left and left controls right.
Right. Okay.
But basically, the main thing we're looking for is that we have balance between the two sides.
Okay.
So yeah, that's essential.
So if I'm moving my left hand here, effectively my right side of my brain is controlling that.
Yeah.
But not necessarily. There are aspects.
The conscious control of it, your
Right.
your right side controls that left movement.
Right. What about, interesting question, what about what part of the brain controls my left kidney and my right kidney? Left side, right side? Is there a mix?
It's a combination of different areas of the brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of the subconscious control occurs on the same side. So it's about, I think, 90% of information actually occurs due to subconscious control of the same side.
Yep.
And then you've got about 10% where it's that crossover, where it's the motor control of the opposite side.
So I think the important thing is viewers don't need to worry themselves about that. That's why they leave it to us to do all the research and testing and understanding, and then that's where we come into the game.
Yeah.
So now stress is a big issue in our day and age. Stress is by many health practitioners and many people is basically coined as the root of all diseases. All problems that we have come from a base of stress. What does stress do to the brain? Physically, what does it physically do to the brain?
Yeah.
In different parts of the brain.
Well, one of the main things we see is that it will actually decrease activity in the frontal lobe.
Right.
So the frontal lobe is frontal, so it's this front part here.
Yep.
Controls complex thoughts, complex emotions, and things involved in like planning and quite complex ideas. And it also controls your posture.
Wow. Yep.
So when we're stressed, we actually see a suppression of this activation in this front part of the brain. So we find it harder to concentrate, harder to come up with complex ideas, harder to be creative, and we find that it will actually our posture will get worse from a decrease in frontal lobe activity.
Amazing. So then, therefore, leading, if that's left for too long, and we're talking, that can be activated for months, years.
Yeah, and the catch-22 is that sitting decreases activation in that frontal lobe as well. So not only are you getting the negative postural changes associated with the actual physical position, but then the decrease in frontal lobe activity, add a bit of stress into that.
Yep.
Other things, poor nutrition and things like that are going to decrease activation in that frontal lobe.
Yep.
And yeah, it all just progressively gets worse over time.
So the activity of the different lobes of the brain can be tested.
Yeah.
And we do that routinely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then what happens if we do see areas of the brain that aren't working enough, or there is imbalance there? What can be done?
Well, it's in the most simplistic terms, we just want to stimulate those areas. We want to get them activated, get them firing, and pretty much give them activities that are going to increase activation in those pathways.
And are those activities difficult?
No, very simple.
They're very simple, aren't they?
Yeah, things, and you can change them depending on people's activities and what they're doing through the day. Quite often, I like to use hand-eye coordination, where you're throwing the ball or something like that.
Yep.
One-leg balance type exercises are quite good.
Yep.
Even doing eye exercises. I find eye exercises can be one of the most powerful stimulating exercises for improving pathways in the brain and starting to rebalance some of those differences from side to side.
That's fantastic. It's extraordinary, because what sticks in my mind is when we look at kids growing up, they're doing a lot of activities that actually are stimulating their brains to grow. They're doing substantial activities.
Absolutely.
When a child learns how to walk, that's basically stimulating the brain to get that balance going so they can walk. When they're learning things, when they're catching, all those things. But what we're seeing is...
It's interesting that you mentioned the kids growing up, because what we'll find is a lot of people, as they grow and they become adults, they stop doing a lot of these activities, and then actually start to regress.
Wow.
And so sometimes, as a strategy to start getting them moving better, feeling better, get their health improving, get these pathways firing, we will need to get them back to doing some of those things that children are doing as they're growing up, these crawling activities, which are very cross type patterns, very, very powerful at stimulating the brain. And a lot of times we need to get adults going back to doing those sort of things like rolling and crawling and things on the ground, on the floor, before they can start improving how they're functioning as an adult standing upright.
So they've forgotten how to do those things, literally.
Exactly, those pathways in the brain just not getting used anymore. After enough time, they start to break down, and you lose some of that things which just should come naturally to us.
And what we see time and time again in practice is we do get an adult who has imbalances in the brain and how the brain is communicating to the body. They get on a health kick and they will come to the gym and they'll start a program or do certain things out of their capabilities, and then they'll get injuries and there's limitations that they hit, rather than getting the brain working correctly, and therefore then they move forward, and then good brain activity, healthy body, that's what it's all about. That's what creates health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting conversations today. So I suppose it's interesting that people understand that the brain is an integral part of our health. A lot of people think that they just need to go to the gym and they just need to work out. That's part of body health. It's part of what feeds the brain, but there needs to be balance in all of this. So this is where we sit back and we read all the research and we try and bring as much to the table as we possibly can. We're doing these assessments on people pretty routinely. So if anyone out there wants an assessment, just come in. It doesn't take too long, and we can give, what we call them, exercises, we call them correctives, what do we call them that people will be doing?
Yeah, I think usually correctives is a term we use quite commonly. I use the term rehabilitation exercises quite a lot as well.
Perfect. Doesn't matter what it's called, as long as we're doing them. Excellent. Well, thanks for the chat today. Extraordinary information out there. Stay healthy. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, see you later.
Bye.